Insulin can make the difference between living a great life and suffering horrible and potentially life-threatening complications. In this video, I share all my tips and tricks for using insulin.
At Simply Diabetes, we can help you manage your diabetes cheaper and easier.
We are not medical professionals. We are people with diabetes, just like you.
Welcome.
You can treat your type 2 diabetes with diet and pills, and for many people that controls their blood sugar well. But diabetes can progress over time, and for some people, what worked before is no longer enough. Over the years, diabetes can progress to the point that you now need insulin. Or, if you have type 1 diabetes, you might need insulin right away. In this video, I share all my practical tips about insulin. A lot of the info applies to both long-lasting and rapid-action insulin. Some info is specific to the long-lasting kind. Recently, I talked to a diabetic woman who was absolutely terrified. She said she was embarking on this horribly restrictive diet, or else she'd go blind. That didn't make sense to me. Most doctors wouldn't recommend a seriously restrictive diet like that because there are other options that better fit most people's lifestyles. So I asked a few questions. And here's what she told me. She had diabetes for several years. She controlled it reasonably well until she suffered another health issue. She didn't tell me what it was, but it interfered with her diabetes regimen. So her blood glucose got completely out of whack. Because of poor health, and now with 2 serious health issues, she ended up in a hospital where they controlled her diabetes by giving her insulin shots in the stomach. As she wasn't very strict about her blood sugar for a while, diabetes began attacking her eyes. Her doctor suggested not the strict diet she told me about, but long-lasting insulin. 1 shot a day, just 1 little prick in the skin. For some reason, the thought of injecting herself in the stomach daily freaked her out. So in desperation, she found this diet and decided to give it a go. I admit my jaw hit the floor. On one hand, the possibility of blindness. On the other, 1 small injection a day. To me, this was a no-brainer. Then I remembered how I felt when I was introduced to insulin. My reaction wasn't quite this extreme, but I was a bit scared. I wasn't freaking out about injections. I saw my dad inject himself many times, and I even would give him a shot every now and then. What I was scared of was sugar lows.
A low sugar means you don't have enough glucose in your blood. The low can have different symptoms and it can be quite dangerous because it affects your brain. If the low is severe, you can lose consciousness or even die.
You can often feel the low. They are mild at first. Everybody feels it differently. And mine start with seeing shimmering lights. And then I feel weak and find it hard to concentrate. Yours could start different, but in general, you could feel shaky and sweaty, hungry, weak, nauseous. If you react to this low immediately, you will be fine. All you need to do is eat something that will raise your blood sugar quickly. The simplest things are soda, not the diet, but a regular one. Candy can help, or you can buy glucose in various forms in a pharmacy. Ask your pharmacist for a recommendation. If you don't do anything to fix the low, it will get worse. You might start feeling anxious or confused. You could get angry, and the famous hangry feeling often is a sign of a sugar low. You could get dizzy, your skin might tingle, your heart could start pounding. If it gets to this point, you must do something, or else. If your sugar falls even lower, you could lose consciousness. If this happens, someone better call an ambulance. I have a bit of a caution if you have a pacemaker. My dad was able to recognize his low symptoms very well until they started him on one. The pacemaker works fantastic and can save a life, but it can mask the symptoms of a sugar low. This is what happened to my dad. He no longer was able to recognize lows, and so he had to be extra careful from then on. I doubt my dad is the only one affected in this way. So if you have a pacemaker, you need to monitor your blood sugar more closely. I recommend a continuous glucose monitor.
If you get lows often, talk to your doctor. You might need to adjust your meds.
Even if you get lows extremely rarely, you should always have some kind of quick remedy with you just in case. My mom never leaves house without a small sandwich. I'm not this good, but I always have a piece of candy. It will get my sugar up quickly and I can get real food soon after. There are two kinds of insulin. The long-lasting one is injected once a day, and this is the kind that most type 2 diabetics take. It is also sometimes called basal or lantus. The rapid action insulin, also known as bolus, is mostly for people with type 1 diabetes, although some people with type 2 do take it. Each type is available in several brands. Insulin comes in vials and in pens. If you use a vial, you will have to fill your own syringes. I find pens a lot easier to use. You can also use an insulin pump. Many people are reluctant to start insulin for fear of sugar lows, but there is no need to worry. Most people with type 2 diabetes won't get a sugar low very often, although it is possible. Taking a daily injection is not a big deal. One injection site, the stomach, scared our friend I told you about at the beginning of the video. But you don't have to inject there. There are several options available. But don't dismiss the stomach quite yet. It's a very convenient site. It's right in front of you, so you can easily see what you're doing. When you're learning, seeing what you're doing is important. And also, there aren't that many pain receptors on the stomach, so the shot doesn't usually hurt. There are actually 4 sites on the stomach, 2 above the belly button and 1 on each side, and 2 below it. Another option, just as convenient as the stomach, is the upper thigh. It's also great because you can see what you're doing and access these areas with both hands. When I was learning at the very beginning, this was my favorite site. There are more possible injection sites, but you need to learn a new skill: injection with one hand only. As with everything else, it gets easier if you practice. The sites accessible to one hand are your upper arms and your hip area, your butt. Yes, you can inject your hip area even if you're not very bendy. I initially thought it would be very hard to reach and hard to control the syringe. But no, if you can scratch your butt, you can inject insulin there. If you have someone available to inject you, try your back, right under your shoulder blades. You can't inject yourself there unless you are a circus acrobat. But it's a great area if you can find someone to inject for you. My mom and I both take insulin and inject each other whenever I visit her.
I sometimes inject Marjana as well.
It takes a bit to learn the right technique. When you start a new pen or when you load your syringe and before you inject, point your needle up and gently flick the syringe. The idea is to force the air bubbles from the syringe up. You then remove the bubbles before injecting. When you inject, insert the needle fully into your skin. Push the plunger gently but firmly all the way down. Make sure your needle is not moving while you're doing this so that it doesn't bend. Don't withdraw the needle immediately. Wait a few seconds and make sure nothing leaks out. If some insulin does leak out, don't panic. It happens. It happens to me too, even though I have been using it for years. If it leaked just a little bit, don't worry about it. Just monitor your sugar and see if you need to correct the situation. If a lot leaked out, I usually add a unit or two, but no more. Learn to inject with either hand. It opens up additional injection sites as you can inject on either side of your body. And it provides more flexibility. It saved my butt when I had a surgery on my dominant hand and had to use my other hand for injecting. I was glad I practiced it when I wasn't stressed out about my injury. It is important to change the injection site from one time to the next. When you push a needle into your skin, you create a micro injury. Your body will repair it over time. But if you keep injecting in the same spot over and over, you will end up with scar tissue. My dad injected his arm too often, and he did have the beginning of such a tissue forming. If this happens, the problem is that when you inject insulin into this tissue, it doesn't get absorbed the same as it would into a healthy tissue. Plus, it doesn't look pretty. So it's best to prevent this and rotate the injection sites. You inject a long-lasting insulin once a day. It doesn't matter when, as long as it is consistently at more or less the same time each day. I inject myself in the morning so that I don't have to think about it for the rest of the day. My mom chose dinner time. That works too, as long as she's consistent. Over time, injecting will become so natural that you won't think twice about it. If you're out in public and it's time for your injection, you just do it. I've injected insulin at airports many times. Nobody notices or cares. You can even do it through fabric if it's thin enough. Another important tip comes from my mom. She takes two different kinds of insulin, a long-lasting one and a rapid-acting one. Depending on what the pens or vials look like, it could be awfully easy to confuse these two with disastrous results. Make sure your pens or vials look different. If they look similar, mark one. You could tie a string or wrap an elastic around a cap of one, or paint a dot with a nail polish. A friend recently reminded me that an open insulin vial or pen has a shelf life. When you start one, you have about a month until it expires and you need to replace it. It's not a problem for me because I use up my pen long before then. But if you take small doses, you might run into this issue. You don't want to forget to switch to fresh insulin. One way to remember is to write both the start and the expiry date on the pen cap. Another is to set a reminder on your phone or calendar.
Ask your health insurance company what their policy is if you accidentally freeze your insulin. Some insurance companies will replace insulin if something bad happens. Others don't. You need to know. Another thing you can do is ask your doctor for insulin samples. Having a little extra can provide some flexibility.
Get an insulated bag for your insulin for when you travel. This is particularly important in summer if you plan to leave your items somewhere hot. When I started my long-lasting insulin, I initially thought that if I divide dosage and inject half in the morning and half at night, my insulin will work better. But that's not how it works. There's no need to do that.
Some people might worry that injections hurt. Does it?
No, not usually. But it can sometimes, a little. Luckily, most of the time it doesn't. If I'm unfortunate enough to hit a nerve, I usually ignore it and continue with the shot. It almost always never hurts bad enough for me to withdraw the needle and start over. But I have done this a few times.
How big a dose should you take?
That's something you need to ask your doctor, as everyone is different. It might also be that you need different doses at different times. For example, when I travel to Europe, I always walk a lot more and eat mom's cooking, which involves a ton of veggies. So I need less insulin then. Let's talk about needles for a moment. We obviously want to minimize potential pain, so thinner and shorter needles are better. I use 4mm needles. There are also 6 and 8mm needles, but smaller needles can bend more easily. And when that happens, you can press on the plunger all you want, but the insulin simply won't flow. When this happens, the best thing to do is to withdraw the needle and take a look. 99% of the time, the needle is bent.
Can you straighten a needle?
Yes. I use the protective cup to do it because I definitely don't want to touch the needle with anything that can contaminate it. If your needles bend often, the first thing to look at is your injection technique. Are you holding your syringe steady or are you moving it after you insert the needle? Ideally, you should keep your pen or syringe motionless. But it can move, particularly if you are injecting yourself using one hand only, and particularly when you're using the non-dominant hand. It also can be that the needles are no good. I once ran into a box of needles that were all bendy. It was infuriating.
I remember that. You were mad.
I had to prick myself with a fresh needle several times to deliver my usual dose. It was painful and wasteful. I took the whole box back to the pharmacy where I bought it, and they replaced it. One more thing, if a needle bends and I withdraw it, sometimes there is a little bit of insulin leaking out. If that happens, the dose I injected will be smaller because I lost a drop. I usually add a little bit then, just a unit or two.
Can you reuse needles?
Most medical professionals in the US, Canada, and other wealthy countries will say no. Some places you get one needle per syringe or pen. This is the case in my native Poland.
How about sharing needles?
I have only one word of advice. Don't.
What happens when your syringe has less than a complete dose?
It's only an issue with pens. As with the syringe you fill, you just add more insulin into syringe from the fresh vial. But with pens, it happens quite often. I use that partial dose at the first injection and then inject the rest from the fresh pen. Yes, I do prick myself twice that day, but I don't want to waste insulin. It's expensive. If the leftover amount is almost a full dose, but is a couple of units short, I just take slightly less insulin that day. I add some more movement to compensate if my sugar is too high that day. Just a few squats or several trips around the kitchen island will do.
One thing that some people struggle with is remembering to take their insulin.
If you're not used to it, it might be easy to forget. What I do is I follow a routine. I store my insulin in the kitchen and get it out when I start preparing breakfast. I don't have to take it right away, but I measure out the dose so that I can see I haven't taken it yet, and put my insulin pen on the counter where I can see it. In summer, when it's hot, I take my dogs for a walk early in the morning. I don't take my insulin before the walk, just in case. That's because the few times I ever had a sugar low was after taking insulin and not eating right away. So I take the insulin after I come back from the walk, when I'm ready for breakfast. Then I put the syringe away immediately so it's ready for the next day.
You can also set a reminder on your phone.
Yes, I know some people that do that.
What do you do if you forget your insulin and you discover it later?
It happens. One common situation where this happens to me is when I travel and I don't follow my routine. If I forget, I then need to figure out what to do. It depends on how long ago I should have taken it. If it's only a couple of hours, no big deal. I take it now that I remember. If I forget until the next day, yikes. I take the dose for that day and I skip the one I forgot the previous day. Taking a double dose is not a good idea. If you have a CGM, your blood sugar readings will remind you.
CGM?
Yeah, that's continuous glucose monitoring. like Dexcom or Freestyle Libre. I'm a huge fan of these, and we'll do a separate video about them. One other thing to think about is travel across time zones. I live in the Pacific time zone and visit my mom in Europe. That's a 9-hour time zone difference. I take a long-lasting insulin, so if my timing is a little bit off for a day, it's not a big deal. I take my insulin whenever I have breakfast. That's sooner than normal on the way to Europe and later than normal on the way back. I've never had any problems. If you take your rapid action insulin but don't have insulin pump, you need to plan your doses with your doctor.
You store your insulin in our fridge.
Yes, I store unopened insulin pens there. But once I start using a pen, I don't refrigerate it anymore. The important thing is not to store it where it's too hot or it becomes ineffective. It is also important not to freeze it for the same reason. I lost touch with the woman that was so afraid of insulin I told you about at the beginning. I hope she decided to follow the advice of her doctor and is now saving her eyesight while enjoying life. Insulin can prevent a lot of diabetes complications, so don't be afraid of it. If you have questions, add a comment to this video. I can't help you with dosage and other medical stuff, but I can tell you how I handle various practical issues.
If you enjoyed this video, give us a like and hit the subscribe button.
You can also visit us at simplydiabetes.net and check out our books on Amazon. See you next time!